Hello and welcome to the latest instalment of the Jato Podcast. My name is Paul Hilton and I'm Head of Retail here at Jato. And I'm joined today by Neil Smith and Matt Crow. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Very good. Thanks, Paul. Yourself?
Yes, I'm very well. Thank you, Neil. How are you, Matt?
Yeah, very well. Thanks, Paul. All good.
Oh, fantastic. Well, look, this first instalment of our 2025 podcast is really going to focus on a look at the dealer space, trends that we've seen in 2024, and really what we can look forward to in 2025. And Neil, I'm going to just start with you. I know a lot of people watching this podcast will be very familiar with you, but I'm sure there's a lot of people as well in the Jato community that maybe aren't as familiar with you. So would you start maybe just giving us a little bit of an intro and a background into yourself?
Yes, indeed, Paul. Yeah. So, yes, my background has been predominantly the used car space. And if I go back to 2010, I'm not going to take too long on this intro. So 2010, I joined Imperial Cars. At that point, that business was selling 80 cars a month. Over a 10-year period as operations director there, myself and the board took that business to 2,000 plus cars a month across the UK out of 17 sites. As we entered 2020 and all the challenges that brought with it, we were acquired by Cazoo in July 2020. I moved across to Cazoo as retail ops director for a period of 4 months to really oversee the transition of our sites and some of our staff into that business and changing those sites into Cazoo collection centres. End of October 2020, exited that business and set up a consultancy, and from that point have been consulting with dealer groups, dealerships, suppliers, data providers, SaaS products, those sort of things, and working with dealers to improve the business performance by using that data, using those niche products and introducing suppliers to dealers and making sure we get the best out of them.
Oh, fantastic. Now we look forward to delving into that in a bit more detail as we go through the podcast. And Matt, for everybody, just a bit of background on yourself.
Yep. So I'm a senior product manager at Jato. So my previous career was at Bentley Motors. So I moved from Bentley as a product manager on their new car ordering system over into Jato. So it was a really good move to have that insight from an OEM point of view, and then moving on to SalesLink, which we'll discuss today, starting on new vehicles, and as we'll go into the insights we're now trying to provide on used vehicles.
No, thanks for that. And yeah, look, I mean, I've been with Jato now for just over 2 years. Neil, you and I first met many, many years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago. I was G-Forces at the time, looking after website development projects, and of course you were at Imperial. I know when we were just prepping for today's session, we thought it would be a good idea to maybe not spend too long in the past, but just to go back to that time at Imperial. And what I'd like to just get a sense from you is the sort of technology and tools that you were using back at Imperial. I mean, we're talking 10 or 12 years ago now when you and I first met, but it always stood out to me just how much you guys embraced technology and the focus you put on prepping used cars. So maybe we start just there, and if you could talk us through a little bit of that background.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think it was probably 2012, Paul, when we engaged with what was then G-Forces. And part of the reasoning behind that was that and just a very brief sort of overview of where we'd come from and what we were doing. When I joined that business in 2010, we had a Auto Trader Razor website. But the reason I joined the business was to develop our own website at that point. We did that. Once we delivered that, it was clear that it wasn't what I would have classed as best in class. So I wanted to go out to the marketplace and find a best in class provider. That happened to be G-Forces at the time. So we engaged with you, Paul, and the team, and we had a 2-year contract there. And I think towards the end of that 2-year contract, we started to look again at what we might be able to do from a bespoke development point of view. The reason for that was that we'd started to track the Carvana experience in the States, and that started to sort of take some hold over there in 2012, 2013. And we had a real will and want to replicate what they were doing. And this was way before clearly delivered to the door and all of those sort of things came into play. But we saw that happening in the States. So we moved back from the G-Forces platform. we saw that out and we moved back into our own bespoke development for the website and sort of back-end systems. And from that point on, over probably a period of 5 years, we built out our own DMS, which handled everything from sourcing the vehicle and automating a lot of that process as we started to buy more and more volume, through the pricing piece, through the marketing piece, the advertising, the sales piece. And we developed our systems from sourcing through to final delivery of the vehicle, only then jumping into a traditional DMS at the end for the accounting piece, really. And the reason we wanted to do that was we were a volume business. We had to be as efficient as possible. We had to be buying the right stock at the right time, at the right price. So smart buying, enabling us to make as much metal margin as possible and sell as much volume as possible, as quickly as possible. So data was key to that. And we started to look at all the different data options that were out there and data providers and working out how we could use that data to ensure we were segmenting the stock that was available to us in the right profile. And to give you a flavour of that, we were reviewing in probably 2018, 7,000 cars a day from different sourcing channels, whittling that down to about 500 that were the perfect mix for us based on our historic data and what we were seeing from Auto Trader. And then we'd be automating proxy bids on those to around, well, we'd proxy bid on the 500 and we'd end up purchasing between 50 and 75 a day. But we knew they were the right specification because we would always focus on the higher factory fit option spec stock. We knew they were the right profile in terms of what turned quickly for make, model, derivative, age, mileage. And it allowed us to accelerate pretty quickly and get to that sort of 2,000 cars a month.
But if you think that was 12, 14 years ago, and that sort of early investment in all of that technology and that sort of process around all of that, when you look at it today, that sort of technology and that access to that technology is available to every dealer, right? Proxy bidding in auctions and the kind of data and tools needed to prep stock. So do you think it's easier for dealers today to create a model similar to that? Or do you think the challenge is harder for a lot of dealers?
I think in terms of the sort of what I see now as niche products that are out there that enable dealers to do what we did for very low cost of entry. So there are preparation tools that allow dealers to manage their prep that are very similar to what we had to bespoke develop for tens of thousands of pounds years ago. You can buy them off the shelf for £199 a month. There are data providers. There are data streams now. There's easy accessibility to that data. You know, back when we were working on this, there was very little API connectivity to some of this stuff. We were taking XML feeds and things like that and having to manually import catalogs in some cases. And that data feed that we were getting at the time was probably, when we look at some of the spec data, we gauged that as maybe being about 95% accurate. But it was crucial to us to be able to spec check those factory fit options and buy the right stock, but also make sure we were advertising the right stock and the right content and the right factory fit options. And we went through a process where we were, when we were selling maybe 1,500 vehicles, we may get 50, 60, 70 of those vehicles wrong in terms of their specifications. So that was not a great customer experience, and we had to deal with that. So we went on a journey at that point, and this is where we got engaged with Jato. So we took the Jato-based model data, so we knew what the options on that vehicle were, what potentially could be fitted to that vehicle. We took that data and then we compared it with the spec check data, so we could sanity check whether actually the spec check data was right, because we could cross-reference that and say, well, hold on, the spec check data says it's got this fitted. Clearly it can't have it because it would never have been fitted, or it was not an option to be fitted. So along with that data and bringing those two data streams together, all the sort of CAP HPI data, we had our own internal data we would sanity check against. We had our own internal assessors who would have that data put in front of them when they were assessing the vehicle so they could physically check it as well. So we probably had around 5 data streams coming in at that time, purely to ensure we were buying the right stock with the right spec, but clearly we wanted to be advertising that and not misadvertising it. So we probably got our data, less than 1% of our data towards the end was incorrect in terms of we may advertise a car with rear bumper sensors and didn't have rear bumper sensors. And that would have come down from 5, potentially up to 10% when we weren't using that data. To your point, a lot of this data now is far more easily accessible. We had to have a dev team of 7 people working on this stuff all the time and working out how to integrate all of this data into our platform, how to cross-match it, how to table lookups. We were bringing damage lines in from the auction houses, and this was all feeding into that one place where our buying team could make considered and informed decisions. But yes, there are a lot of data options out there now. I think the biggest thing probably for a lot of the dealers that would benefit from this, and those I'd say are the, outside of AM100 clearly have a view on this and understand it, right? Outside of the AM100 and going further down into that sort of rump of dealers in the middle, I think it's more about awareness of the availability of this data and the fact that they don't know where to go to get this data. So I'll talk to a lot of dealers and I'll say, well, you can go here and this product costs you £299 a month. And if you buy that product at £199 a month, it'll improve your preparation, you'll have complete visibility. So it's probably an awareness piece now, that the products are out there, the data's out there, but how do these guys get their hands on it and what do they do once they've got it?
Oh, that's good. And Matt, Neil's talking there about using Jato data many, many years ago. You're obviously focused on how we package and serve that data to the dealer world. So what are we seeing in SalesLink there in terms of breakdown on those sort of fitted options and the information that helps dealers make better decisions on buying and selling cars?
Yeah, so in SalesLink we have new vehicles. So there's obviously a big focus on new vehicles during COVID and chip shortage and global issues. The focus for new cars for dealers over the past few years has been a lot less in their control. So we do have new car insights in SalesLink giving very detailed overview of popular options, option uptake. But then from the used car perspective, the new piece of functionality we have in the product gives you that very detailed breakdown of a used car from the build sheet, exactly what was spec'd on the vehicle, the price of those options. And it's really key that functionality is in the dealer's hands to ensure that they not only price the vehicle right for their own benefit, but they give complete transparency for the customer. Just going back to your point, Neil, I think it feels like 10 years ago or however long it was, I think there's a cultural shift as well in a sense around data. I think in 2024, it's very clear data is king and, you should be making data-driven decisions. I think there's a piece around just, yes, the software's there, but just getting that understanding in dealers' minds that if you know the data's there, you can make decisions from it. And it feels like you were almost ahead of the game in a lot of the effort you were putting into all of those work streams at the time.
It's just from my experience now, if I go back a number of years, the bigger dealer groups had the capability and the bigger independent businesses like Imperial had the resources and the capability to do a lot of that kind of big decision making around stock acquisition or web development or prep. Today, I look at it and think even the smallest of dealers with 20, 30 cars in stock have access now to tools and solutions and software and platforms that mean they can operate in a similar fashion. They can operate with a data-driven approach to stock acquisition. They can use digital prep tools and solutions. They can have either AI backgrounds on their imagery or turntable solutions or video AI solutions, stuff that would have been quite unattainable, I think, for a small dealer many years ago. But there's been a real push, I think, from a kind of technology perspective. And the UK, I think, leads the way. Neil, you spend a lot of time as well looking at international dealer operations and international operations. What are your thoughts on where the UK sits in that kind of global space from a kind of retail perspective?
Look, I think if we go back to 2014 when Imperial en masse went out to NADA New Orleans at that time, I think it was, and we
No, it's in New Orleans this year as well, actually, isn't it?
is it? Right. I think it was. We went out there expecting to have our mind blown in 2014 because everybody was telling us how far ahead the States was and US, and actually we walked around and we were a little bit underwhelmed, if I'm honest, and that was 2014. And I do think certainly over the last 10 years, and looking at the European space, and I've done some work in Europe. I've got a biggest used car retailer in Baltic states, weirdly, but those guys actually, if you look at what they're doing, follow a similar path to what we did 10 years ago in terms of their data. They're very, very hot on data over there in terms of being the number one used car retailer, right? A lot of their competition over there don't do data at all. So they've adopted this, and they're bringing in multiple data streams, and they don't have the luxury, I suppose, that we have in the UK of being able to leverage the main aggregator data that we can through Auto Trader's portal, right? So that data now is, and again, that was something we didn't have access to in 2014. We had low-level access to it, but we still had to do quite a lot of work on it. Now, a dealer that's got 50 cars in stock selling 30 has got all of this rich data at hand. How many of them actually really dive deep into it and use it? I'm not certain, And I think when we start to talk about, and I've had dealers where I will go in and I will probably recommend 7 or 8 products to them to improve their business, right? And these will be data products, these will be presentation products, 360 spin products, those sort of things. Now, the issue I think with that is that they're overwhelmed because they're looking at all of these different options, which clearly would improve their business, but they're also trying to run their day-to-day business. And that is becoming probably increasingly difficult for dealers at the moment with some of the challenges. So I suppose it's more around making that data and those options really accessible, simple to understand. And again, something we did in Imperial, we were really hot on ensuring the advert content was correct, as I said, but also presented right. So getting the right information into that advert, getting the right spec into it. We used to weight the spec. We'd know that a pan roof on a particular make model would sell that car, so that would go first. It would go into the attention grabber. We would do a lot of work on ensuring we were covering all of those reasons that we bought the car. It had the right leather, it had the right spec options. That's great buying a car with that, but if you're not then publishing all of that information on an advert, you're losing the additional value that provides. And this is probably where, understanding where you guys are going with Jato and the sort of automated element of it, I think this is where dealers will start to see benefit, where they don't have to think about it. All they need to do is plug a VRM into something and it generates content for them, and then it's the right content and it's actually got everything they need in it. No one's having to handwrite an advert anymore. And it starts to provide dealers with real benefit and without, in their minds, a lot of effort. And again, I'll talk to dealers, and if I said to them today, yeah, you can get a feed from so-and-so and that'll do everything you want, they said, well, what the hell do I do with that? Someone's going to give me a feed, an API. I don't understand that. So, it's trying to manage those, not manage, but giving them options that are simple to action.
And Matt, Neil's talking a little bit there around sort of AI-generated descriptions. I know you've done a lot around AI, but let's start maybe just to look back at sort of when did Jato first start using AI in sales, and what was the kind of thought process around that?
Yeah, so like I said, SalesLink originally was for new vehicles, new vehicle insights. About 18 months ago, it was, the ChatGPT was starting to explode across the world. And we very quickly identified that there was a perfect opportunity to incorporate AI into the product. So within SalesLink, we have, thousands of records about, sales transactions, which detail make, model, trim, version, color, the most popular options, the average discounts, all of the attributes and specs on a vehicle. And it was at this point that we identified that AI would be the perfect place to incorporate it. So originally, SalesLink was very much focused on the sales area of dealerships. But obviously, all of that data goes into decision-making when dealers create marketing content, landing pages, customer emails, social media posts. which when you look at AI, generative AI, it lends itself perfectly to that. So we started our journey and incorporated the Microsoft OpenAI Azure function, which on a very technical note just sets us aside from that ChatGPT world. Everything you put into ChatGPT is not anonymized, so they essentially will use that data to train the model. And we were very clear to ourselves and to our dealers that we didn't want to put their data into a third-party software. So the benefit of using the Microsoft AI means that everything in there is personal, is privatized, and essentially we have a number of prompts built into the background so that any time a dealer wants to generate content from SalesLink, they go through a simple wizard, selecting the content type, the data that they want included, incorporating market insights as well as their own dealer information that they share with us. And out the back of that creates them a piece of content they can repurpose throughout their business externally to their customers. So that was our first journey into AI. It was a piece really to broaden the SalesLink proposition, not only to the sales element of dealers, but the marketing department, the digital departments. And then we took that journey onto the next stage, looking at used cars. So, like you said, Neil, how we enhance advertising our used cars. Dealers can now very easily input a VIN VRM, return the vehicle spec, and then a click of a button generate that used car description that can go on your Auto Trader, can go on your dealer website, including key elements such as attention grabbers, those top options, the prices. And I think just it's the transparency you mentioned, Neil, is the key thing here. I think it's easy to keep thinking, well, it's benefit for the dealer, but it's about making the customer feel confident. When a buyer sees all those details laid out, the factory built options, the optional extras, they know they're not being overcharged because they can see that transparency of what is exactly on the vehicle. We're exploring, a lot of new use cases for AI. I think there's a balance, not using it for the sake of using it. So we're trying to just be key in how we innovate with AI and make it fit for purpose.
I mean, it's interesting because, the average price of a new car has increased significantly over the last 10 years. But in doing so, the specification of those vehicles has increased significantly as well. There's huge competition, obviously, and we see this in Jato as kind of our core business in terms of the competitiveness of brands to spec those vehicles. So it's really important, isn't it, to be able to surface that specification to the buyers in the second-hand market, somebody that might not be quite familiar with the spec of a 2022 used vehicle if they've not bought a used vehicle for a number of years. And things like panoramic sunroof or upgraded speaker systems, they become real selling points for those vehicles in the used car market. And dealers traditionally rely on just the source data to populate that sort of specification. So I think AI has a real place or benefit rather, in being able to surface that key information, especially if they were non-standard spec options. So if they were added fitted options to those vehicles. It's interesting just looking at some of the data that we've got available in terms of the average value of added spec on used vehicles. And in the UK, I think we're at about £7,500 on average of added spec fitted to a car. Obviously, different brands have different values. More premium cars have a higher value, but £7,000 is a lot of money on average, isn't it, to be fitted to a vehicle, and for that spec to be present on that car in its second life, 3 or 4 years down the line, just becomes really, really valuable for dealers.
Yeah, it does. And look, we identified that in the early days, and it was about, we clearly, if it was a 3-year-old BMW 5 Series, it had £5,000 worth of spec. Our average retail at the time was probably 14.5. That's probably about 17.5 today, 18.5, 3-year-old ex-lease stock. But some of those cars would have £7,000 worth of spec on them. Okay, we weren't going to get £7,000 more for it. But what it did do was, when it was compared with someone who didn't, a dealer who had the 5 Series without £7,000 worth of spec on it, and our car, it may have been 500 quid more, because we felt that it deserved to be 500 more because of all the additional spec. And we were fixated at that point on making sure that was one of the highlight areas, modules in the VDP, the vehicle details page, and we would split out all of the spec. We'd have the original factory fit value of it. So and we would take all of that spec data and make sure that it was advertised and published on that page, because we wanted customers to understand what that vehicle was. And every used vehicle is unique. We're not talking about 100 similar vehicles from a new car perspective, which have all got base model spec on them. Every car is different, especially when you get to that level, and we have to surface that difference to ensure we can maximize our profit, but also improve our turn. If we're up against somebody who hasn't got £7,000 worth of spec, we're going to sell that car quicker. And by virtue of that fact, whether we're getting 500 quid more above cap above cap retail than we'd expect, or Auto Trader retail pricing, we can probably get a little bit more from it based on the fact we turned it quicker.
And that stock turn is so important in used car business today, as you know, anyway. Yeah. Maybe moving on just a little bit. I'm conscious of our time. It's been great chatting through on the used car side of it. But looking at the new car market a little bit, I know, Neil, you've had a lot of specialism in the used car market, but every used car starts its life as a new car. What do you make of 2024 in terms of performance for new car sales in the UK?
Started off pretty well by all accounts, but it's sort of ended on a bit of a downer, I think. I suppose 2024 didn't set the world alight. I think 2025 is going to be really interesting. When you have a major manufacturer coming out saying they're not going to sell any new cars, that starts to think, well, what is going on in this marketplace? We've got the EV challenge ahead of us. Certainly when we see some of those manufacturers, Jaguar, Land Rover, Stellantis, saying they're either not producing cars or pulling back on production so they can hit EV mandate. I think it's probably one of the most challenging periods, especially, with what's happened from a financing perspective as well, it doesn't help dealers out there, but I always say, Paul, that I'm far happier at the moment sat on the outside looking in. I really wouldn't want to be having to deal with this day to day at the moment. So, and look, with all of that in mind, dealers have got to be looking at conquesting from their competition. They've got to be looking at buying smart, selling smart. They've got to be looking at their marketing activity, and they've got to be trying to understand how they're going to sell the volume of new or used cars next year with these challenges ahead of them. And going back to the sort of beginning of the discussion, really, and what we're talking about, if they're not utilising that data to make those right decisions, to make those pricing decisions, to make that stock purchasing decision, to make that marketing decision, then they're going to be moving backwards while others are moving forward. And it's going to be a dog-eat-dog world next year. In my mind, there's no doubt about it.
And Matt, what are we seeing in Jato in terms of discounting on vehicles at the moment? I know there's been a lot said about discounts really being the driving force behind the EV registrations this year. But have you got any thoughts on what we're seeing in sales link and the insights we're giving dealers around discounts at the minute?
We did some analysis last month, and it's quite shocking the amount of discounts that we're seeing on EVs now compared to ICE vehicles. Year on year for electric vehicles have gone up 53% across the electric range compared to
discount.
Discount. Yeah. So, discount for electric vehicles for 2023 were around 3,200 on average across, all the vehicles. And we're now seeing that up to 5,000. So it's showing that the discounts on EVs are either, being caused by reduced demand, heightening competition from Chinese brands, which are ultimately pushing those prices downwards. We've pulled out some key makes from that analysis, which just show. If you look at the BMW i4 was a key one, doubled its discount from 2023, from 3,400 to 7,300 in 2024. Now, it could mean the OEMs are making a push to make that more competitive, or it could mean that they're being affected by competition.
I mean, the targets around the ZEV mandates are playing a big part in this, aren't they? They've got to hit those thresholds set by the government. There's been no news on them changing those numbers yet. I mean, I actually read a piece in Car Dealer magazine, Robert Forrester, saying that they were holding back delivery or the OEMs are holding back delivery of petrol and diesel vehicles to ensure they were hitting those ZEV mandates before Christmas. So they've got customers waiting for ICE vehicles in November, December, not getting delivery of them because the OEMs are insisting on the deliveries of the EVs in order to hit those targets. That's just a different dynamic, isn't it, that OEMs have to deal with now in terms of that. I can't push those vehicles out the door. I can't make those deliveries. I've got to hold those back until I've hit a certain threshold of EVs. And the clear winners in that are the likes of Tesla, who have 100% EV book and effectively sat on these sort of swap tokens that they can sell to OEMs that are short of those targets. That's just a different dynamic that affects the industry today, I think.
Yeah, and I think, look, if you look at that again, we go back to the customer experience, ultimately, yeah, dealers suffer, clearly, because they've got to deal with this nuance, as it were. They've got to understand, and the manufacturer has to understand how to hit those targets, otherwise the cost is exponential for them. But ultimately, customers are going to suffer. The customers are suffering because they're having their ICE vehicles delayed, when they could quite easily have that ICE vehicle delivered before Christmas. Due to these mandates, they're being delayed. And it must be so challenging for dealers dealing with that discussion with the customer, dealing with the OEMs, dealing with the mandate. And as I say, 2025, we're looking at what are the government going to do to facilitate sensible sales and volumes of EV in terms of subsidies. And they've got to do something.
Yeah. And not just here, I think in the European market as well. I mean, we're seeing the challenges across the European market from OEMs, factory closures and delay in production. It's affecting more than just the UK, but we generally led the way in terms of EV adoption in Europe. I think the SMMT stats in terms of EV registrations year-on-year change was up 58% increase in a market share of 10-25% of EV registrations last month. So clearly there's adoption, but it's at what was the sacrifice, right? Clearly heavy discount and a delay in ICE vehicles. And that has a knock-on effect, of course, on the used car market downstream.
Yeah, and I think if you, again, going back to the guys I work with in the Baltic states, they've got locations in Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. All of their purchasing is done through Holland. They probably have, out of 1,300 cars in stock, about 5 EVs because they cannot sell EVs in those regions. And that's again, there's no subsidies there. The awareness is way lower out there than it is here in terms of EV. But if we start to look at that across Europe and we look at the impact in the UK, then yeah, something's got to be done because these targets are ramping up month in, month out. Or year in, year out. So, yeah, I don't know what the answer is. Well, the answer is probably subsidies. And that's it, isn't it, really? So make it attractive to the consumer to consider it.
And there's still awareness. I do think there is still a lot more that needs to be done about educating on EVs. I mean, I drive an EV. I feel quite comfortable about it. I don't have range anxiety. You kind of, once you get in the rhythm of it, you generally feel good. But there's still I think there is still a lot of knowledge that needs to be shared with the general population about EVs, range, charging infrastructure, and all of the things that come with it, right? Right, so let's have a look ahead then. So if we had a magic ball predicting 2025, any key trends? What are the trends? What are you expected to see in 2025? Neil, should we start with you?
Yes, yeah. Look, continuing to be challenging. I think we'll see a lot of the new car dealers focusing very heavily on used, especially Jaguar Land Rover, got nothing else to sell, let's put it that way, or Jaguar. So I think there's going to be a massive focus on used, which brings its own challenges then into the independent space because competition increases from the franchise space. So understanding. Look, it always goes back to me to buying smart. That's the start of the journey. It's no good buying vehicles that are going to take 2 months to turn. You've got to be buying smart. You've got to be using the data. You've got to understand the data. You've got to leverage that data to buy smart, price smart, market smart, and sell quick. So those challenges are certainly going to hit in terms of that used space. The challenges in the new space are, as we've discussed, we've got the EV challenge. We've got the new manufacturers holding back ICE. We've got some manufacturers not producing cars. So agency model seems to have quietened down, seems to have moved away, and some some OEMs have backed away from it now, having said they would do it. But the next challenge is now this EV piece and the lack of supply probably back into that used space, which will again, if we see a reduction in vehicles being produced, it's going to hit us again in 2 to 3 years in the used space. So we're in that cycle. We've just come out of that lack of supply in COVID, and we're probably back into a reasonable place, although supply is still down. So I just think there's going to be multiple challenges. It's not going to stabilise, and it's going to be survival of the fittest.
I agree. I think cost control is going to be a real key factor for dealers next year. It always is. Obviously, everybody has to watch what they spend and what comes in, but I think it'll be a real challenge for a lot of dealers next year, because it won't be plain sailing like as we came out of COVID and the demand was huge and the prices were going up and everybody was making very good profit. There are headwinds, I think, that are gonna face the retail space. We've still got the finance situation that isn't going away, as we know, and that's playing a big part, as well as some of the after sale products and the ancillary, the add-on products, and maybe margins being hit a little bit there. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Neil. You've got to buy right in the first place. Make sure you're really, really looking at that data. What sells quick? What's gonna generate the best margin? What am I likely to sell locally, and what do my audience want, and how can I get those vehicles out a lot quicker? And just be very efficient in terms of operations. It sounds really simple, but those are the things that I think dealers really need to focus on. Matt, what about you? Anything you want to add?
No, I was going to say we focus quite a lot on the transparency of the vehicle, the options for a customer's point of view. But the key start journey is the dealer having confidence buying that car in the first place. So I mean, if we just talking about SalesLink, talking about the functionality we have in there, it's a platform that gives you a very quick indicator, very quick few steps to get to that gospel hymn sheet of exactly what you're looking at. So I mean, Neil, from your perspective, is there what do you, from your history, the most common pitfalls dealers would fall into, or yourself, around missing things on vehicles that you really need the data and that insight on that would help you going forwards?
Yeah, but look, with the best will in the world, a lot of dealers are still relying on a human buying team, okay? Or they're buying themselves, and the owner drivers will buy themselves. They'll have little time to look at anything else. They'll start the journey of buying a vehicle at 3:30 the day before, looking at all the catalogues, getting ready for the next morning. They'll spend 3 hours the next morning sat on the auctions, and they're not typically using data. They're using their experience, which is not wrong. However, data can inform and help them make those choices. And what typically they're doing, a lot of dealers, because they're time poor and they're not using data efficiently, is they are only accessing maybe 1 or 2 supply channels. And those will be channels that have got volume. But what they're missing out on is maybe another 18 channels that can supply vehicles to them. And because they're not looking at the whole market, they're restricting themselves, and then they're saying, it's difficult to buy at the moment. When actually out in the marketplace, there may be vehicles that are extremely well suited to their profile. They're just not visible.
And I think that's actually the next kind of tech explosion of aggregators that are bringing together all of that inventory and presenting it in a way to dealers. I mean, we had the Kazoo and the kind of direct to consumer push, and we all know what's happened there in terms of of that, and dealers were able to very quickly mobilize their own kind of online retailing and home delivery services to complement the stock services. It's a lot more challenging for somebody to do that in the kind of aggregator space, centralizing the stock. I mean, you say the channels, you've got the traditional auction channels, physical and online auction. You've got then a whole range of remarketing platforms out there. You've got a lot of the big leasing and rental companies looking at their own defleeting operations and how they can maximize the profitability of their cars at end of fleet. And then we've got the online buying platforms and the motorways of this world. There are a lot of places dealers can buy stock from, but there's also a lot of dealers buying that stock, right? So that's a big challenge for dealers in 2025, is sourcing the right vehicles from the right providers, making sure they're spec'd right, making sure they can maximize that profitability. And I think 2025 will see a kind of growth in some of those online providers that are looking at how they can better support the supply chain of vehicles to dealers, as opposed to more online used car dealers coming into the space, personally.
And look, you're right. There is definitely a space for an aggregator in that place, if they can get the buy-in from those supply channels. And from a vendor perspective, it would provide more eyeballs on their product. It would provide more customers for each of those channels. But it's more about ensuring that dealers have that global view of what is available, and then using the data to be able to sift that very quickly. And that's where we got to with, we were only probably pulling data in predominantly from the three main auction houses at the time, and we had direct deals that we were able to pull data in. But what it allowed us to do was have visibility of 5,000 to 7,000 vehicles a day, get down to our subset of 500 and buy 50 to 75 of them. Now, you can't do that without data. So just no physical way. You can do that without manipulating data. And
you couldn't do that without a team of people before. Whereas nowadays, because of the technology, because of companies like ourselves surfacing this data in that sort of way, you don't necessarily need a team of developers or a large team of buyers. And that's something that benefits today's retailers that you maybe didn't have the luxury of. If we go back to the conversation 10 or 12 years ago, you needed people as well as the data. Whereas these days, a lot of the technology is there to support those businesses looking at digitizing those sort of stock acquisition processes. And the same, I guess, Matt, back to the point around AI. AI is a bit of a buzzword at the moment. Everybody's, I think my iPhone's just updated with the latest Apple Intelligence. So I've got probably booked my calendars and arranged my meetings for me off AI. But yeah, so Matt, how are you seeing dealers using AI within SalesLink today?
We've had really positive feedback with the AI we've launched so far. Firstly, on the generative AI, supplying dealers with marketing content, and then secondly, on their used car descriptions. It's the time and effort it takes dealers now to create a used car description, accurately listing exactly what's on the vehicle, dressing it up in a very readable manner, and calling out those key options priced at the original price, and ultimately just selling the car in the best way it should be sold. Great uptake so far, and looking into 2025, we see that as a real key driver of why dealers will want to use SalesLink. Putting in a VRM, so very quickly understanding the vehicle, and then having a piece of content you can repurpose on all your platforms within 3 minutes or less is going to be huge.
Yeah, and I think this is where the benefit of AI comes in. It's not there to replace people in a dealership necessarily. It's there to improve operational efficiency. I mean, I know one thing we've talked about will be available next year or this year rather for dealers is that ability to automatically update that content. I mean, Neil, imagine we're looking at a time where a car hasn't had clicks or inquiries. I mean, you guys were looking at that data all the time in terms of how many page views your cars are having on site, the inquiries on those pages. So the ability then to use AI in a smart way to dynamically update that content. If an advert isn't working, if it's not performing, if the attention grabber isn't generating the clicks, having that ability to use AI to refresh that content, to regenerate those ads, becomes a real a real kind of asset for dealers, I think, moving forward, that they would have manually had to spend the time updating. I mean, automated price adjustments has been available for quite some time, right? But having now automated ad adjustments and text adjustments to those ads is another step in the right direction around dealer efficiency.
Yeah, and you're right there, Paul. I mean, we would review the adverts. Our buying team were responsible for the life of the car within Imperial. So they would do the pricing, they'd review the ads, they'd look at the engagement. And if there was low engagement, no leads, they would revisit the ad, they'd change the attention grabber, they'd make sure that all the specifics that they bought the vehicle for were actually advertised right. They check the imagery, they may get it re-imaged. If we'd had a car that was imaged in the summer and then we were hitting winter and suddenly there's snow and all the images are...
Oh, you still see it these
days. See the 300 cars it's 300 days in stock. And we were even looking at using that sort of AI option to rewrite adverts seasonally. So coming into Christmas now, we'd have put a seasonal bent on those adverts, and you could do that. You could do that for 2,000 cars, 2,400 cars. It didn't matter. You utilize those tools, as you said, Paul. It is not about replacing people. It's allowing people to do jobs that AI can't do better. Getting them engaged in areas of the business that AI is never going to really help support. Securing the knowledge that AI can manage that piece of the journey for the dealership successfully. And look, with the best will in the world, our guys would still sanity check stuff that we were putting in front of them.
Absolutely.
Data's great, but you can't let data just do everything. So we would say to our team, look, use the data that we're providing you. We're going to tell you what car to buy based on the specification, the profile that we need. We're going to tell you how much to pay for it because we're going to work out what the costs are based on the damage lines we're taking in. That doesn't mean you have to buy it. If you want to apply your own history, but put the reason that you're not going to buy it in a box so we can look at that afterwards. Or if you want to pay more, by 100 or 200 quid than we're telling you to pay for it, again, put the reason in there. But we're not going to just blindly go with data. We will use data efficiently. We'll use data to get us to a point where we're supplying you with a subset of cars that are the ones we want. Then you can have a little bit of autonomy, not too much, but a little bit of autonomy to make some decisions. And I think that's probably key to note that this data here is there to inform, but there is still a need at times to have that oversight just to make sure that the data is informing them correctly.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, look, I think we're coming to the end of our session today. I mean, is there any closing thoughts, any words of wisdom, Neil, you want to give to the listeners out there in terms of what to expect in the year ahead?
Well, as we said, it's going to be challenging, but the word of wisdom and what I tell dealers all the time is these streams of data that are available to you, use them. That is it. It's there. It's available. Yeah. The amount of dealers that still do not access that data or don't, sometimes they don't know what to do with the data, but the fact is the data's there. Don't ignore it. Don't still go to auction, put your finger in the air and think that's a good car to buy, right? Use the data.
Matt, from you, any final thoughts?
I mean, I would just wrap up with, SalesLink is the product out there available to new and used car dealers. So for any listeners who are interested, please reach out. We've got a lot of features, a lot of insights which can benefit, many parts of the operations. And as you've heard today, a detailed listing clearly justifies the price and reassures buyers they're making the right choice. So, the product we have today certainly can help with that, and we're keen to share it.
Fantastic. Look, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been great to chat with you for the last half hour or so. And enjoy the rest of your day.